Alright then gang, so I think we've reached the point in the course now where we've nailed all of the JavaScript basics and we can start to do things which I think are a lot more fun, like interact with a browser or a web page. And we can do things like add content to a web page with JavaScript, or we could change the style of a web page with JavaScript, or we could do things like react to user events, like click events when they click on a button. And we can also do things like create an annoying pop-up, and I'm going to show you how to do that as well. Because at the end of the day, this is the kind of thing that JavaScript was initially created for, to make a web page and a user's experience on a web page more interactive. So we'll be kicking off this chapter by learning first of all about the document object model. This is going to be the mothership of this chapter, and everything we do to interact with the browser is going to be governed by the document object model, also known as the DOM for short. Then we're going to look at how we can add, change and remove content from a web page. We're also going to talk about user events like click events or mouse move events and see how we can react to those in JavaScript. And finally, we'll put everything together that we learn to make a nice little pop-up effect on a web page. Now for this chapter and pretty much everything going forward, you need to make sure you have your web server still running so we can preview what to do in the browser. Now in one of the first chapters in VS Code, I showed you this package, Live Server. And I showed you how to spin up a local development server using that so we can preview our web pages in it. But just in case you've forgotten, I'm going to show you again now. So remember, first of all, you need the live server package installed. So you need to search for that there if you've not got it already. Then come to the HTML page that you want to open with the live server, right click and go to open with live server. And that is going to open it up in a browser so you can preview it. So you need to make sure you're running your page on a live server for the rest of this chapter and pretty much the rest of the course. So then my friends, the document object model, or the DOM for short, it's at the heart of any kind of web page manipulation. But what exactly is it? Well, it's something created by the browser when an HTML document loads inside it. Now ultimately what we want to do is interact with the HTML document from our JavaScript code to do things like change or add or remove content. So once the document, the HTML document, is loaded in the browser creates an object which models this document, and this object is called the document object. Now it contains many different properties about the HTML document and many different methods that we can use to interact with the HTML document. So whenever we want to do something like remove an element from a browser or respond to a user clicking a button or add something to the browser, what we do is we do that via the document object. Now we can see this document object in action if we just open up the console in a browser window. So then in a browser, if you open up the console, we can just come down here and type document and press enter, and we're going to get this document object. Remember, this document object is created by the browser and it models the HTML page. So if we expand this, you're not going to see what you probably expect, and we're not going to see different methods and properties available to us on this object. Instead, inside the console, what we see is a visual representation of the HTML page with all the different elements. So we can expand each one of these and look inside them. Now, if we go to elements, it looks very much like this thing over here with all the different elements that we can expand. So that's what we see if we type the document object out inside the console. Now, we do have access to a load of different properties and methods on this document object. And if we just say document and then dot, we can scroll through all of these different things right here. And you can see there's absolutely tons of things we can use. So for example, I could say document.location and press enter, and we get this information back about the location, which includes an href right here. And if I say document dot and I'm going to go to URL, then we just get back the URL, which is up here. Okay, so there's loads of different properties. Also, we can use methods like document.get element by ID or by class name or by name or tag name, etc. So there's loads of different methods we can use as well. So programmatically, the document over here is modeled by this document object created by the browser, and inside our JavaScript code over here, when we start to code, we have access to that document object and we can use it to interact with the HTML pages using those different properties and methods. But the DOM also describes how a document looks in a visual way too, and having an understanding of that is going to help us a lot when we come to interact with it. So the document object model describes our HTML page as a hierarchical tree of nodes. So if you think about an HTML page, it has all these different tags in it. And at the top of the page, at the root of the page, we have this HTML tag and everything else is inside that. Then inside that, we have a head tag and a body tag. Maybe inside the head we have a title and some other things. Inside the body we could have an h1, div, a div. Inside one of the divs, some p tags, and so forth. The document object model sees our HTML page as this hierarchical tree of nodes, and each one of these elements is considered a node in the DOM. Now this one right here, because it's the very top element inside our document, it's called the root node. Now inside the title, inside the H1 and the P, we might have some text. Now they are also considered nodes. These are text nodes and these are element nodes. So the idea is that if we want to interact with a web page, we'd use the DOM to reach into this tree of nodes and we'd get a reference to a particular node. For example, the H1 right here. So say we've got a reference now to the H1, we can use some different methods on that reference to change its content or change its style or remove it or do something else with it. So that's the general premise. So I'd like you to keep this picture of the DOM in your mind because it will help when we start to talk about the relationship between nodes and traversing from one element to another. So now we have a rough idea as to what the DOM is, and we know we can use the built-in document object to interact with the web page. Let's kick on by seeing how we can reach into the DOM and actually select elements and get a reference to them. So then when we work with the DOM and we're adding, removing or changing content on a web page, there's a couple of steps involved. Now the first step is to decide which element on the page we want to either add some content to or remove content from or change in some way, and then reach into the DOM and get a reference on that element. So that's the first step. And this action of reaching in and selecting elements is known as querying the DOM. So once we've done that first step, then we're in a position to carry out the next step, which is the part we actually do something with that element, like change its content. So for now, we're just going to focus on the first step, reaching into the DOM and getting a handle or a reference on certain elements and nodes so that we can do something with them later. First of all, let me take you to the index page and we can see a few different elements on this page. So we're going to try querying the DOM for these different elements. So we can see we have 3 p tags right here, one with a class of error. Now say for example, I want to reach in and grab this p tag right here and get a reference on that element. So the first thing we're going to do is store our reference to this element in some kind of variable. So I'm going to create a constant and I'm going to call it para for paragraph and set it equal to something. Now remember, we use the document object whenever we want to do something with the web page. So I'm going to say document first of all, then I'm going to use a method on that document object called query selector. So this, in my eyes, along with another query selector method I'll show you in a minute, is the best way to actually grab an element from the DOM or query the DOM. So all we do is place a CSS selector in here as a string to whatever element we want. Now, if you need a refresher on CSS selectors, then check out my YouTube series on CSS. I'll leave the link attached to this lecture. But essentially, if we want to grab the first p tag right here, we can just say we want p, and that is going to grab that tag. Now, what this does is it goes into the document and it goes from top to bottom and it grabs the first p tag it comes across and then it ignores the rest of them. Okay, so this is okay if you want to grab the first p tag. Now what I'm going to do is just log this to the console.log para, and save it, and let's view this. So now we can see this p tag. So now we have a reference to this paragraph tag inside this constant, and then later on we can do things with that paragraph tag, like change the style of it or delete it or change the content, etc. Okay, so imagine now we wanted to get something else. Imagine we wanted to get this p tag right here. How would we do that? Well, we can't use this selector p because that gets the first one it finds, but we can use the class selector because this has a class of error. So in CSS, the way we do that is by saying dot, because this is a class, then the class name error. So if I save this now, it's going to get a reference to that paragraph here in this thing right here, and then we'll log in that to the console. So save it and check this out in a browser, and now we can see we have this thing over here. Now what if I go to the index page, and down here I add another div, give this a class of error, and then say this is another error. Now imagine I want to get this thing right here. Well, what can we use? We can't use the error class because that will just grab the first error it comes across, which is this, and ignore the rest. We can't use a div because it would come across the first div, which is right here. So we have to combine these. We want a div, which is an error. And the way we create a CSS selector for that is by saying div.error. This gets us a div with a class of error, and that's unique. There's only one div on the page with a class of error. So if we save this now, and come over to the browser, we can see now we have this div. Again, if you need a refresher on CSS selectors, make sure you check out my CSS playlist on YouTube. The link is attached to this lecture. But you always have the browser to help you out if you're not sure what a selector is. You can come to the browser, and if you wanted to get a selector for something, you could right click it, inspect it, then inside the elements tab, highlight the element you want a selector for, right click it, go to copy, and go to copy selector, and that gets us a unique CSS selector for that element. So if I now go over here and paste that inside here, that would get the H1, and you can see we're looking for the body and then the first H1 child. So save it and let's go to the console, and we can see we get that H1. Okay, all right then, so that is the query selector right here. Now what if we wanted to grab multiple elements? We don't just want to go in and grab one particular p tag, for example. We want to go in and grab all of them and do something with all of them. Well, we can do that using another version of the query selector, very similar. It's called query selector all. So I could say const paras, plural, and set that equal to documents.query selector all. And then we pass in the CSS selector. Well, we just want the p tags. So that is going to go into the document, and it's going to get a reference to all of the p tags, and it's going to store it as a collection inside the paras constant. So now if I console.log paras and save this, we can see this over here, and it's a node list, and we can see these three different things in it, p, and p.error. So these three p tags. It's gone in, got a reference to all of those, and it's stored them in a single node list. Now this node list looks very much like an array, but it's not an array. We can't use all the array methods on a node list, but we can do some things with it. Like an array, we can use square bracket notation to select a single element from that node list. So for example, I could say console.log paras 0 to get the very first element, save that, and we can see the first p. If I do 2, it's going to get the third one. Remember, this is because JavaScript is 0 based. We start at 0, then 1, then 2, and we can see we get the third one right there. Okay. Now, much like an array, we can also use for each. So I could say something like paras.forEach, and then we'll take each paragraph. That's the singular. That's what I'm calling it. This is an arrow function with this parameter. So it cycles through the node list, and for each individual node, we get access to that inside the callback function. And we can just say console.log the para, and let's put our semicolons on, save it. And down here, we can see it cycles through them, and we get each one logged to the console. The last one is logged twice because we also have this down here. Okay, so we can use for each on node lists as well, which are basically just a group of elements, a group of nodes. Okay. So let's do another example. I'm going to say const errors is now equal to documents.query selector, and we want all, and then we want the errors, so .error. So anything with a class of error, that's this p tag and this div tag. So we want both of those in a node list. So let me save and save over here, and what we're going to do is log out the errors this time, save it, and preview, and now we can see we have a node list with 2 items, p.error and div.error as well. So now we've got both of those. So These two methods, query selector to get a single element and query selector all to get several elements, they, in my opinion, are the two best methods to select elements from the HTML document. But there are other ways too which can be useful at times, and we're going to have a look at those in the very next lecture. So in the last lecture we saw how to use two different methods, query selector and query selector all, both on the document object to query the DOM and grab elements from it. Now the query selector, that grabbed a single element, but the query selector all, it grabbed multiple elements based on CSS selectors. Now in this video I'm going to show you some alternative ways to query the DOM to grab elements, and I'm going to show you three in total. The first way I'm going to show you is to grab an element by its ID. So the way we do that is by first of all creating some kind of variable. I'm going to call it title and set it equal to document, and the method we're going to use is called getElement by ID. Now if we look inside our index page, we can see we have this h1 right here. I've given it an ID of page-title. Now in an HTML page you shouldn't have more than one ID of the same name, so there shouldn't be another ID down here with page title. There should only be one ID of that name on the page. So inside here all we need to do is place in a string the ID. Now we don't need the hash symbol, which we would do if we were using query selector to select an ID. That's already implied in the name. We're already selecting an ID. We just need to specify the name of the ID, and that is page title. So this goes out and it gets a reference to this page title ID element, which is the h1. So now if I say console.log and the title, we should see that in the console. Save it and check this out. And voila, we get it right there. Cool. So the next one I want to show you is how to get elements based on their class name. So let's come down here. I'm going to say const errors because we're going to go out and grab the errors, and that's going to be equal to documents.getElements by class name. And notice the difference here. Elements is singular, so this only ever grabs a single element. This here is plural, so it will grab multiple elements if there are multiple elements of that class. So inside index we can see this has a class of error and this has a class of error. I want to grab both of those so I can enter the class name in here. Again, we don't need the dot as we would do in a CSS selector using query selector. It's already implied that we're getting a class in the method name. So we just pass in the class name without the dot right there. Now, if we log this to the console, errors, oops, we need to do this correctly, errors, and save this. Let's have a look what happens. Okay, so we get this thing right here. Now this is an HTML collection. In the last video when we used query selector all, we saw that we got a node list. Now these two things are similar but not identical. Like a node list, we can still use square bracket notation to get a single element from that list or that collection. We can say console.log and then errors, and we'll say 0 to get the first element, for example, and it's still going to give us that back. But we cannot use the for each method on the HTML collection. If I try to do this, let me come down here and say errors.forEach, and then inside we'll do a callback function with an error parameter. This is each individual error. This is not going to work. Console.log error, and save this. We can see we get an error. We can see errors.forEach is not a function. So we can't use for each on an HTML collection. Okay. So what I'm going to do is leave a little document attached to this lecture just showing the different things we can do with a node list and an HTML collection, so you have those clear in your mind. But anyway, this is a way to grab elements based on their class name. So let me just delete that, and I'm going to comment all of this stuff out for now and this stuff up here, so it's not putting us off in the console. And finally, I want to show you how to get elements based on their tag name. So I'm going to try and grab a reference to all the p tags in the document. So I'm going to be looking for the tag name p. So the way we do this is again by storing it in some kind of variable and setting it equal to documents.getElements by tag name. So they're all self-explanatory, they're quite easy to remember. And we just pass in the tag name as a string right here. So this goes out and it grabs all of the p tags on the page, and it's going to store them again in an HTML collection inside this paras constant. So if I say console.log, and we're going to log out paras, We should see those over here. Again, HTML collection. And if I want to grab a single one of those, I can use square bracket notation. So console.log, paras, and we'll just say we want the index 1 from there. Save, and we can see that p tag right here. So all of these different methods give us different ways to query the DOM. It doesn't much matter which methods you choose, but anything you can select with these methods, you can also select with the query selector methods I showed you in the last video. So I tend to stick with using the query selector or query selector all because it's simple and very flexible, and you can query any element you need using them. Also, it's useful to be able to use for each directly on a node list, which is returned by the query selector methods. Tag name and class list both return HTML collections, which we can't directly use for each on. We'd have to convert these into arrays, first of all, which is just one extra step we can do without. But again, you can still use these methods, and they're nice to know. You can use whichever one you're most comfortable with. So then, once we've done the first step, which is querying the DOM for some kind of element that we want to change, the next step is to actually do something with it. And in this video, I'm going to show you how we can change the text inside elements and also the HTML inside elements. So first of all, let's have a little look at the index page. We can see we still have this content right here, and I've also added this div with a class of content over here. Now, the first thing I'd like to do is just use a query selector to get the first paragraph over here, and then I'm going to change the text inside this paragraph. So first of all, we need to say const, and we'll call this para. We're going to store our reference to this paragraph tag inside this constant, and we'll set that equal to document.querySelector. And inside here, we just want to pass in p. That is the CSS selector to get the first paragraph on the page. So once we have that, how do we actually get the inner text over here inside the p tag? Well, I just said the property directly. It's called inner text. So if we come underneath here, I can say console.log, and we want the para.inner text like that. This is not a method, it's a property. Hence we don't use parentheses like this. We only do that with methods. This is a property name, and what this does is get us the inner text of that element. So if we save it and preview, we can see that text right here. Now, what if we want to update that text? Well, all we need to do is grab that text and set it equal to something else. So we could say para.inner text is now equal to ninjas are awesome. And then if we save that, what it's going to do is grab this paragraph, get the inner text property, and it's going to set it equal to something else. So if we preview over here now, we can see it's changed on the page, and that is pretty awesome. That was very simple to do. We just reach and grab a reference to the paragraph, then use the inner text property to set it to a new text. Now notice when we do this, it overrides the old text completely. Now, if you just wanted to append to the text, you could use plus equals. So I'm going to save that, and we can come over here. We still get hello world, but it adds on the extra content as well. All right. In my case, I just want to overwrite it for now. So now we've seen how to change the inner text of something. What if I want to change the text of several items at once? Well, let me just comment this dude out first of all, and I'm going to come underneath. This time we're going to grab all of the different p tags. So we'll say const paras, that's plural, equals documents.query selector all, and we want all of the p tags, so we get a reference to all of those as a node list. And remember, when we have a node list, we can use for each on them to cycle through it. So we could say paras.forEach, and then we pass through a callback function in here. That callback function as a parameter will take the individual item as we cycle through the node list. We're going to call this para, but you can call it what you want. And inside this callback function, what I'm going to do is for now just console.log para.inner text. Now this is going to cycle through this node list of all these different p tags, and for each one it's going to fire this function and take each individual paragraph. Then we're logging out the inner text of that paragraph each time around, so we should see all of these in the console. All right, so we have these different p tags and we get all of this content inside these p tags. Now what I'm going to do is update the context of each one of those. I'm going to say p.innerText and set that equal, or we'll say plus equal and we'll add on new text. So we're taking all of the paragraphs and we're adding this extra text inside them. We're not overwriting it completely. We're just adding on the extra text at the end of each one. So save it, and we can see an error, and that is because we've called it P and not para. Okay, so let's save that. And now we can see new text, new text, new text, and new text. Awesome. So that's how we cycle through several different elements and add text or change the text to each one of those elements using for each. Okay then, so that's how we change the text of something using this property inner text. But what if we want to change the HTML of something? So for example, we have this div at the bottom with a class of content and it has a p tag inside it. What if I want to grab this element right here, then I want to change the HTML inside it? Well, we can do that just as easily. So the first step is to get a reference to this. So I'll say const, we're going to call this content and set it equal to documents.query selector. And inside, we're going to use the content class. And now we have that content variable. We can say console.log, and I'm going to say content.innerHTML, like so. So HTML is all caps, so not inner text anymore, inner HTML. So if we save this, now we can see the HTML content inside this content div, which is just that paragraph tag. So that's how we get it. What if we want to update it? Well, let me just comment this out and come underneath. I'm going to say content.innerHTML is now equal to an h2 tag. And we'll say this is a new h2. And oops, we've done all this in capitals. So let's make the h2 down here not capital. It doesn't matter that this is capitals, that's fine. And we're going to save this. What it's going to do is take this HTML and replace it with this HTML right here. So if we save it, we can now see this is a new h2, and we can see that element right there inside the content div. So like before, when we worked with inner text, this completely overwrites the content. So if I want to just append the content, then I would use plus equals instead. So I'd save that, refresh, and now we can still see this is the content, but now we get an h2 as well. And if we open this content div up, we can see both of those are now in there. So plus equals to append, or just equals to overwrite it. Okay, so I'm going to use plus equals. In fact, I'm going to just comment this out. We don't need that anymore. Okay, so I'm going to go through one more example now. I'm going to imagine we've gone out to a database and got a list or an array of people. And what we want to do is output a little HTML template for each of those people in the array. So what I'm going to do is first of all say const people is equal to an array, and inside here we'll just do a few people. Mario first of all, then Luigi, and then Yoshi. Alright, so we have this array of people. Just imagine we got this from a database or something. Now we want to cycle through these people, and we want to generate a little HTML template or snippet for each person and output that person in the HTML. So the first step is to get the people and say for each, and then what we're going to do is take the person, and inside a callback function we're going to create an HTML template. Now all we're going to do is grab the content, which is this thing over here, and we're going to append to it each time a little template. So we're not overwriting the content for each person, we're just adding an extra little bit of content. So this is going to be a template string because I want to embed this variable inside it. And what we'll do is create a p tag, and inside that we'll output the person. So we need our $, curly braces, then the person, then we're going to close off the p tag. So we're cycling through the people. For each person, we're firing this callback function, and we're taking the content over here, which is this div, currently has a p tag in it. We're taking that content reference and we're appending to the HTML. We're not overwriting it, we're just adding a little bit extra for each person. And that little bit extra is a p tag with the person embedded inside it. So if we save this now, come over here and go to the console, we can see an error. We've got an assignment to a constant variable. So That's because we're trying to change the content directly. We need to say .inner HTML, of course, and then we're appending to that, save it, and now we can see these things right here. So if we inspect that, inside the content now, we can see all of these different p tags. So that's a good example of when we might use this kind of thing. If we have data we want to spit out into the browser, but we want to do it in some kind of template way, we can cycle through that data and we can output an HTML template for each bit of data in that array. So all of this text and HTML changing is going to be hugely useful later in the course when we come to work on our different projects and we need to update the HTML or the text in the browser. So in addition to changing the inner text and the inner HTML of an element, we can also get and update attributes of HTML elements. So if we take a look in the index.html, we can already see I've created this HTML code. We have an A tag right here with an href attribute going to google.com, and this is the text. Then we have a p tag with a class of error and this text. So if we take a look at this in the browser, it just looks something like this. So this is an HTML attribute, href, and this is an HTML attribute. There's loads of different types of HTML attributes that we can either get in JavaScript or set in JavaScript. So let's have a look at how we can do that with these elements. First of all, we need to get a reference to the element that we want to change. So I'm going to say const link is equal to documents.querySelector, and we want the anchor tag. So that is going to go and grab the first anchor tag we come to, which is this, and store it in this reference right here. So now we can use that. And what I'm going to do first of all is use get attribute to get the href attribute right here. So whatever the value is here. And I'm going to log this to the console. So we'll say console.log. Then we want the link. And then we want to use a method called get attribute. And this gets us an attribute. Now we need to pass in as an argument what attribute we want to get as a string. And we want the href attribute. That's what this thing is called. So if we save this now and preview, we should see this over here. So that is the value of the href attribute, and that's how we get an attribute. Okay then, so what if we want to change the attribute or set an attribute? Well, I can take the link, then I can use a method called set attribute instead of get attribute, and this time it takes two arguments. First of all, what attribute do I want to change? Well, I want to change the href attribute. Secondly, what do I want to change it to? What is the value of this attribute? Well, it's going to be https then www.thenetninja.co.uk. So if I save this now and preview, if I inspect this element, then we're going to see the netninja.co.uk as the value of this attribute. Now I'm also going to change the inner text, so we'll say link.inner text and set that equal to the Net Ninja website. Okay, so now we can see the Net Ninja website, and this is where it goes. So that's an example of how we can change an attribute to something else, and then that's going to automatically update in the browser. Okay, so let's do another example. What I'm going to do is come down here and say const message is equal to documents.querySelector again. And this time we're going to grab a different element. I can't type at the minute. Selector. And the element we're going to grab is going to be the p tag down here. So let me pass in p right there. And what I'm going to do first of all is log out the value of the class attribute, because this is still an HTML attribute. We're just going to grab that value and log it to the console. So console.log, and we want the message, and we're going to use the method get attribute to get an attribute, and the attribute we want to get is the class attribute. So let's see what happens over here. We can see error, which is the class of that tag. So we can also change this. I'm going to say message.set attribute, set attribute, and we're going to set the class attribute, and we're going to set it to a value of success. So instead of error now, it should be success. If we go to elements, we can see now it has a class of success. Awesome. So this would be useful in a case where, for example, a user fills out some kind of form. If there's an error, we can change the class of the form to error to maybe make it red or something like that. And if it's successful, we can change the class of the form to success to make it green around the border or something like that. Okay. So if we want to set an attribute to an HTML element that doesn't already exist, we can do that as well. So far, when we've been setting attributes here, we've been setting attributes using attributes which already exist in the HTML. Now, for example, I could add on a style attribute from JavaScript to this p tag. And I can do that using exactly the same method. It's just set attribute, and I'm going to set the style attribute. And inside here, we'll just say the color is green. Okay, so it doesn't matter that this attribute doesn't yet exist on this tag. If it doesn't exist, JavaScript is just going to create it. So if we save it now and preview, we can see the text is now green because we now have this style attribute right here applied to it. So any HTML attribute you have in your tags, you can either get or set this way, and that is going to be very helpful in a lot of cases. So in the last lecture, I briefly showed you how to change the style of an element by directly setting the style attribute of that element using set attribute. But there's one major drawback to that. So let me demo this. First of all, inside index.html, we just have an h1. It has a style attribute, and that style is just color is orange. So it looks something like this in the browser. Now imagine we want to add a new style to this style attribute. Well, if we come down here, we've got a title reference already. We've stored that in here. That is query selector, and we're getting the h1, which is that. So we can just say title and then use set attribute. We're going to set the style attribute, and what we want to do is add a margin. So I'm just going to say margin is going to be 50 pixels. So what's going to happen when I do this? Well, if I save it and come over here, we can see we get that margin, but it's totally overwritten the orange thing right here because we colored it orange in the HTML. So when we use this method set attribute, especially when we come to styles and we want to add additional styles, it's just going to completely overwrite what's currently there. So I don't want this behavior. I want to be able to add extra styles instead of just completely overwriting them. So how can I do this? Well, we can do that in JavaScript using the style property. So first of all, I'm going to log this to the console so we can take a look at it. I'm going to say console.log, and then we want the title, which is this thing up here. Then we say .style. This is a property of this element. So then, if I save this now and preview over here in the console, we can see this big object, and it has all of these different properties. These are all CSS properties, and we can see most of them are empty. But if we scroll down to color, we can see the color is orange because that's what we set it to be in the HTML. So we can use this style property to add styles on the fly or remove them as well. So imagine I want to get the color style property, and I just want to see that. I could say console.log, we want the title.style, and then in the style object over here, when we logged it to the console, we just grab whatever the property name is. That's the CSS property name, right? Color. So we can say .color, and that should give us orange. So we see that right there. Awesome. Now, what if I want to add styles then? Well, I can come down here and say title.styles, or style rather, then the property name that I want to add a value to. Now, it can be any one of these different properties listed right here. This is every single CSS style or CSS property name. So I can say something like margin, and I can set that equal to something. It's in a string, 50 pixels. Now, if I save that and refresh, we see we get the margin. If I inspect, we can see this now has a margin, but it also still has the color. We've not overwritten that. We've just added a new property. So for that reason, this way is better than this way. Okay, so let's do another example. Let's say I want to change the color style. So we already have orange right here. If I want to change that, I can say title.style.color is equal to crimson. Save that, and let's view this in a browser, and we can see that updates the color now. And we can see over here, the color is crimson. And it still has the margin. So again, it's not overwritten anything. Well, it has, it's overwritten the original color, but not the margin. All right then. So what if I want to do something like the font size? Well, in CSS, the property is font-size, and then we give it something. But we can't do that in JavaScript because it looks at this and says, okay, well, you're taking the font and you're trying to subtract this thing right here, the size. So in JavaScript, when we have a double barrel property name like this, we take away that and we use camel case like so. So what we can say is title.style.font size and set that equal to something. I'm just going to set it equal to 60 pixels, save it and check it out in a browser. And now we can see it has a font size of 60 pixels as well. Now, if you're unsure of what the name will be, remember, always refer back to the style property and just look inside that. So if we open this up, we can see all of the different names right here. Okay. So for example, border left color, you can see it's camel case. Okay. So if we want to delete a style, we can just grab it by saying title.style, then the property name, for example, margin, and then I'm going to set that equal to an empty string. So it was 50 pixels before when we set it here. Now I'm setting it to an empty string, so it basically removes that property. So if I check this out, we can see the margin has now gone, and inside the style attribute, we no longer see margin. So most of the time that we're adding or removing just a single style, I'll use this way of doing it rather than the set attribute method. But a lot of the time, instead of just adding inline styles this way, it can be easier to predefine all of your CSS classes in a style sheet somewhere and then use JavaScript to add, remove or change classes on your HTML elements. And we'll see how to do that in the very next lecture. Okay then, so in this video, I want to show you how we can easily add and remove classes from elements. So first of all, you can see I've got this dummy content right here. We have a P with a class of error and this stuff inside. Now, I've also linked up a styles.css style sheet in the head, and that's over here, just two very simple styles. One for a class of error, padding 10 pixels, color crimson, and a border of crimson as well. And one for a class of success, padding 10, color lime green, and a border of lime green as well. Now currently this has a class of error, so if we view this in a browser we can see something like this. It's red text with a border of green. If we change this to success, then we see the green text and the green border. Okay, so what I'm going to do is show you how to change classes from the JavaScript. So let's get rid of all of last lessons code, and instead what I want to do now is grab first of all the P tag, so this thing right here. So I'm going to use the query selector to do that and store it in a constant called content, and that's equal to document.querySelector and then the P tag. Okay, so now we have a reference to that. What I'm going to do is log out a whole list of this element's classes. So I can do that by saying console.log then the content.class list. So this is a property and it gets us a list of all the different classes this element has. So in the console, we can see we get a DOM token list, and we can see just one thing in here, error. So that's this class right here. Now, if I give this another class, I'm just going to call it another and also test. I'm going to save it, and we can see now we have all of these different classes inside this token list. So that's a way to get classes that an element has. Now, what if we want to add or remove classes? Well, let's try first of all adding one. So I'm going to say content.classList to get that class list. Then we can use a method on this class list called add, and that's how we add a class. Now inside here we pass a string of the class that we want to add. So say I want to add a class of error, and what I'm going to do is, to begin with, I'm going to get rid of this so it doesn't have that class. Save it, and over here I'm now taking this content, this p tag, and I'm adding a class of error to it. So if I save it now, even though I removed it from the HTML, when we first get that class list at the top of the JavaScript file, it doesn't have a class yet, but then we add the class and now we can see it right here. So then, how do we remove a class? Well, I'm going to just duplicate this and change this to remove. And then that is going to remove the error class. So if I save it, then we're not going to see a class anymore. Okay? So then, that's how we add and remove classes. Now I'm going to add the success class. So I'll say content.classlist.add and success. And we should see that this is now green because we have the success class. Awesome. Okay, so that's a simple way to add and remove classes from tags in the HTML page. So let's just comment all of this out. And I've actually got a little challenge for you to do. So I'm just going to copy a bit of HTML from my GitHub repository right here, and I'm going to paste it inside over here. So let me get rid of that and then paste in this content, and it's just a series of p tags. Now some of these p tags has the word error inside, and some has success, and some have none. Okay, so they don't have error or success. Now the challenge is I want you to query all of these elements, and then I want you to cycle through them, and I want you to give any tag a class of error where error is inside the text, and I want you to give any tag a class of success where success is inside the text. Okay? So if you want to pause that here and then try it yourself, then unpause it and see how I do it. Okay then, so this is how I'm going to do it. So if we go back over here, first of all, I want to get a reference to all of those different p tags. Now to do that, I'm going to say const, call this paras, and say that's equal to documents.query selector all, and we want all the p tags. So that's all the p tags first of all. Remember, this returns a node list, and we can use for each on a node list to cycle through them. So I'm going to say paras.forEach, and for each paragraph I'm going to pass that into the callback function. I'm just going to call it p. You can call it whatever you want. Then I want to check if the text inside each paragraph as we cycle through them has either error or success in it. Now then, in previous lessons when I showed you how to get the text content of something, I've used inner text. So we could say console.log, for example, p.inner text, like that. Okay, and if we do this, then we should see all of that in the console. Now that is a fine way of doing it, but another way of doing it is by using the text content property, and that's going to get us exactly the same. So what's the difference then? Well, the difference is if we use inner text, then it will get us all the text that's visible. So say for example, I have something here like a span tag surrounding this error, and let me just put the closing tag there, and I give this a style equal to display none, right? Well, what that is going to do is hide this error from the page. Now, if I look in the first paragraph, we don't see error. So if I use now over here inner text, what that does is get us all of the visible text inside that element. Now, error is no longer visible, so we don't get that. Now, if I use text content, let me show you this, text content, what that does is get all of the text inside the tag regardless of whether it's hidden or not. So if I save this JavaScript file and come over here, now we can see we get all of that. We get the error text as well, even though it's hidden. So what I'm going to do in this example, even though you could use inner text, I just wanted to show you the difference, I'm going to use text content. So I'm going to say right here that we want to check if the text content of any of these p tags as we cycle through them has either error in it or success in it. So let's check for the error first of all. So let's do a little if statement. We'll say if, and then we want the p, the paragraph that we're currently iterating through, dot text content dot includes. Remember, we can use this method to see if a string, and that's all this is at the end of the day, it's a string of text. We can use this to see if it includes a certain word or phrase. So I'm going to see if it includes the word error. So this returns a Boolean. If it does include that, then it's going to return true, and we're going to fire this code. If it doesn't, it returns false. So if it returns true, it means that that paragraph that we're currently iterating has error inside the text. And if that's the case, what we want to do is give that a class of error. So we'll take the paragraph, we'll say .classList, and then we'll say .add, and we want to add the error class simple. So if we save this now and preview in a browser, we can see anything with error inside it is given this error class, and we can inspect to make sure that we have that error class on those. Awesome. Now we need to do the same thing with anything that has success in it. So we're going to do another if check to say if p.text content. And again, if you wanted to here, you could use inner text. I'll do that here just to show you. Dot includes, and we're going to see if it includes now success. If it does, then this returns true, and we'll fire this code block. And inside we want to take that paragraph tag and give it a class. So we'll say class list dot add, and we want to add a class of success, like so. So save it, and let's have a look over here, and we can see now anything with success in the text has this class of success. Okay, so that's how we add and remove classes. Now there's one more thing I'd like to show you, and that is how to toggle classes. So we've seen add and we've seen remove up here to either add or remove classes. But what if we want to toggle a class? So if an element has a class, we want to take it off. If an element doesn't have the class, we want to apply it. Well, we could use the toggle method. So what I'm going to do is, first of all, come over here, and I'm just going to give this h1 a class equal to title. Now I'm going to grab that over here by saying const title is equal to document.querySelector, and I'm going to grab the title class. So we have that now. Now what I want to do is just say title.classList, and I'm going to toggle a class, and that class is going to be test. So currently it doesn't have a class of test, but if I use the toggle, it means that it will give it that class of text. So if we take a look at the h1, we can see it has a class of test now. Now if it has a class of test and we use toggle again, then it's going to remove that class. So if we save that and now preview it, we can see it gives it to begin with, then because it has it and we run it again, it removes it. So now we no longer have it. So there we go. Add, remove, and toggle. 3 methods that we can use on this class list property of elements to add, remove, or toggle classes. Okay then my friends, so that is the end of this free series here on YouTube. But if you do want to take your JavaScript skills to the next level and learn more advanced concepts like interacting more with a browser, events, Ajax, databases, and object-oriented programming, as well as put what you learn to good use by making 5 different JavaScript applications from scratch, then make sure you check out the rest of this course on Udemy. There's another 13 hours worth of content on there which covers a load more stuff. It really will black belt your JavaScript skills and put you in a great position to be able to make your own JavaScript driven applications. So the link to that course is down below, and I've applied a discount to it so that you get it for $9.99 instead of the full price it's normally at. So I really hope you've enjoyed this so far, and hopefully my friends, I'll see you over at the rest of the course on Udemy soon.